The Archon's chamber glimmered with the cold light of trisolar panels, casting harsh, angular shadows across the polished obsidian floor. The assembly had gathered as they always did, resplendent in ceremonial vestments and authority, the weight of centuries pressing down in the silence between them. All eyes turned toward the lone human who had been summoned. The human, named Calder in the bureaucratic records, but Cal, to the few who dared speak casually, stood rigidly, his posture unconsciously mirroring the rigid confidence of the Archon himself. Calder was small compared to the tallest of the Arcadians, 6 meters of exoskeletal majesty, but his presence was different. Quiet, grounded, something indefinable. The Archon, known across the inner systems as Vorthzel, leaned over the high dais and spoke in the resonant voice that vibrated even the bones. "Human," he intoned, "you claim understanding of the quantum mandate, yet your species has neither navigated the shattered realms nor survived a single orbital siege without external aid. Why should I entertain your theories?" Calder said nothing. The assembly tittered, an alien sound like chimes struck by wind and metal. Silence, however, seemed unnatural for a human. Most of the delegates expected him to stammer, to plead, to justify. They expected fear. They expected words. But Calder simply looked around. His gaze swept the room, noting the hierarchies, the subtle tremors in armor and flesh, the way the Archon's tentacle-like appendages twitched with irritation. And still he said nothing. Vorthzel's eyes narrowed. "Do you comprehend that your silence is interpreted as insolence?" Still, Calder did not respond. The assembly murmured again, louder this time, a cascade of questions and indignation. The human's calm was almost unsettling. Finally, the Archon slammed a talon-like hand onto the dais. "Enough! You are dismissed." Calder turned and left, his footsteps echoing softly in the vast chamber. But the silence he carried with him was not empty. It lingered, rippling outward in a way the Archon did not immediately perceive. Part 1. The Dismissal. Calder returned to the vessel docked at the station, a small freighter the Arcadians had allowed him for mobility. The docking bay was humming with machinery and servos adjusting massive cargo loads. He moved past them unnoticed, as though the world itself deferred to his quietude. A voice crackled over the comms. "Calder, report. Did the Archon relent?" "Not yet," he replied simply. His co-pilot, a reptilian being with iridescent scales named Scath, hissed softly. "Your lack of words. It unnerves them. Why do you persist in silence?" Calder shrugged. "Sometimes, words are not necessary to change minds." Scath's eyes flickered. Bold words for someone who refuses to speak. Calder only stared at the docking bay ceiling. Inside, he was running simulations, iterating probabilities, and calculating the next sequence of events. Silence, to him, was a tool. Not an absence of action, but a focus, a pressure applied without friction, a way to unsettle those who relied on the sound of their own authority. Part 2. The Quiet Strategy. In the weeks that followed, Calder moved quietly through the outer systems, attending briefings and observing the failures of the Arcadian fleets. The Archon's forces were vast, yet rigid. Every decision required consultation with layers of hierarchy that made them sluggish and predictable. The human noted patterns: battle formations, supply chains, intelligence leaks. The Arcadians assumed superiority, yet they were blind to the subtleties Calder saw: micro-decisions, hidden dependencies, and the small vulnerabilities inherent in their perfectionist society. He began deploying small interventions. A single supply convoy rerouted subtly, a minor recalibration of the orbital shields, a delayed transmission intercepted. No grand displays, no declarations, no words. Just precise nudges that the Arcadians misread as luck or coincidence. At the next assembly, the Archon confronted him again. "You meddle in systems you do not understand," Vorthzel declared. "Your human craft is primitive. Your intelligence fragmented. Why persist?" Calder remained silent. The Archon's tendrils quivered. "Do you not hear me?" Calder simply gestured toward the projection of a recent skirmish, an Arcadian fleet scattered in perfect formation, yet defeated by an unknown and unseen adversary. The numerical reports spoke louder than any speech could. Vorthzel's eyes widened, though he tried to mask it with indignation. This cannot be human handiwork. There must be another force. Calder continued to stare, impassive. His silence became a mirror, reflecting the Archon's doubts back at him. The assembly erupted in panic. A human, with no weapons more advanced than clever algorithms and improvisation, was undermining the omnipotent fleet. The very idea was intolerable. Part 3. The Revelation. Calder's method was simple yet devastating. He did not attack the Arcadians directly. He attacked their assumptions. Their reliance on hierarchy, their obsession with control, their faith in brute force over adaptability. Through silent observation and subtle interference, Calder orchestrated an outcome that the Archon could neither explain nor counter. By the time the next engagement occurred, the Arcadian forces were systematically outmaneuvered, not by strength, but by insight. In one decisive moment, Calder coordinated a human-led battalion to cut off the primary Arcadian supply line. Without resupply, the fleet stalled. Without orders, the admirals hesitated. Without words, the Archon's authority faltered. The silence, Calder realized, was not emptiness. It was a weapon. It forced the Arcadians to confront uncertainty directly, without the comforting framework of their endless protocols. Vorthzel convened an emergency council, furious and confused. How is it possible that a single human, silent, unarmed, unarmored, has rendered my fleets ineffective? One of the elder delegates, a crystalline entity named Dreth, murmured, "Perhaps we underestimated the human mind. Perhaps it is not words, but perception that guides him." Vortzel's eyes narrowed. "Then it is perception we must control. Bring him to me. Now." Part 4. The confrontation. When Calder entered the council chamber, he did so without ceremony. No bowing, no hesitation. The Archon sat at the apex, tendrils curled with barely contained rage. "You have disrupted our operations," Vorthzel hissed. "Do you not fear reprisal?" Calder did not answer. "You will speak," the Archon demanded, his voice cracking against the silence. "You will tell us your methods." Calder tilted his head slightly, the faintest acknowledgement of presence, but still, no words. "You dare mock the Archon with silence," a delegate cried. Calder's gaze swept the room again, taking in the fear, the confusion, the sudden self-doubt. And in that moment, a realization dawned on the Archon. Calder's silence was not defiance, it was clarity. Unbound by protocol, unburdened by fear of judgment, the human mind moved as freely as the currents in the void. "Silence," Vorthzel muttered, almost to himself. "It is the mirror, a reflection of our own uncertainty." Calder's stillness was a lesson, not a challenge. Slowly, deliberately, Vorthzel understood that to control this human would not require punishment, but comprehension. And so, for the first time in centuries, the Archon listened. Not to words, but to presence, to action, to subtlety. Part 5. The shift. Calder's influence spread quietly. The Arcadians, initially enraged and fearful, began to see the utility in human methods. Fleet commanders who had relied solely on rigid doctrine now observed, calculated, and adapted in real time. Strategies became flexible. Decisions were no longer suffocated by the weight of centuries-old protocol. The Archon, once inflexible and authoritarian, found himself learning. Not from lectures, not from data streams, but from quiet observation of a single human who refused to speak. Calder became an advisor without title, a strategist without command, a force whose power lay in his restraint. Across the inner systems, reports began to emerge. Arcadian forces were not only recovering from losses, they were innovating. Techniques previously unseen were being applied, tactics adapted to environments that had confounded even the most experienced commanders. The human silence had not only changed the outcome of battles, it had reshaped a civilization's approach to thought, to strategy, to leadership. Part 6. The acknowledgement. Months later, the Archon summoned Calder once more. This time, there was no fury in his gaze, only a tempered respect. "You have done what no Arcadian could," Vorithzel admitted. "Not through strength, not through coercion, not through argument, but through quiet. You have shown us the power of observation, of patience, of unspoken insight." Calder remained silent. "Then I must say," the Archon continued, "that perhaps the galaxy has misjudged humans. Perhaps it is not our fleets, our numbers, or our doctrines that ensure supremacy, but minds that act with courage, precision, and thoughtfulness. Minds that can remain silent when all others shout." Calder inclined his head once. That was all. The Archon's chamber, once a place of rigid hierarchy and unchallenged authority, felt different. The echoes of silence lingered, teaching those present that power did not always roar. It could whisper, and in whispering, change everything. Epilogue. Years later, when historians chronicled the rise of the new Arcadian strategies, Calder's name appeared rarely, but always in the footnotes of the most critical battles. The human who had never raised a voice, who had never struck with traditional might, had altered the course of a civilization. The Archon himself would tell the tale, though always with a certain humility. The galaxy doubted him. I dismissed him, and in that silence, he reshaped us all. In the void beyond the inner systems, where stars burned cold and civilizations collided, one truth remained clear. Sometimes, the quietest voice carries the greatest power. Months later, the Archon summoned Calder once more. This time, there was no fury in his gaze, only a tempered respect. "You have done what no Arcadian could," Vorithzel admitted. "Not through strength, not through coercion, not through argument, but through quiet. You have shown us the power of observation, of patience, of unspoken insight." Calder remained silent. "Then I must say," the Archon continued, "that perhaps the galaxy has misjudged humans. Perhaps it is not our fleets, our numbers, or our doctrines that ensure supremacy, but minds that act with courage, precision, and thoughtfulness. Minds that can remain silent when all others shout." Calder inclined his head once. That was all. The Archon's chamber, once a place of rigid hierarchy and unchallenged authority, felt different. The echoes of silence lingered, teaching those present that power did not always roar. It could whisper, and in whispering, change everything. Part 7. The transformation of the Arcadian Empire. In the following cycles, Calder's methods became an unspoken curriculum for Arcadian commanders. Not written in manuals, not announced in decrees, but demonstrated through example. The human who acted without ceremony, who observed without interruption, who struck at the exact moment and never before, had shown the galaxy a new kind of power. Fleet admirals learned to pause before acting, to question assumptions, and to trust perception over protocol. Intelligence divisions shifted focus from raw surveillance to nuanced analysis. Even the Archon himself altered the structure of command, introducing flexibility, innovation, and the possibility of improvisation, concepts previously alien to the Arcadian mind. The galaxy noticed the change. Former enemies paused before attacking Arcadian holdings, uncertain of what strategy might emerge next. Diplomats reported humans alongside Arcadians, now negotiating terms with equal footing, their silence more persuasive than any speech. Through all this, Calder said little. Words were unnecessary. Actions, presence, and deliberate restraint carried their own authority. Part 8. The Legacy of Silence. Years passed. Calder, though human, became a figure of legend among multiple species. Stories spread of the quiet human whose unspoken strategies had saved countless lives, prevented unnecessary destruction, and reshaped a civilization. The Archon, now older and tempered by reflection, would recount the story to new delegates. The galaxy doubted him. I dismissed him. And yet, in silence, he changed everything. Never have I known such clarity, such focus, such power that did not demand acknowledgement. The human had shown the galaxy a simple truth. Leadership is not measured by volume, authority, or fear. Leadership is measured by the courage to act with precision, the wisdom to observe, and the strength to remain silent when all others shout. In the void beyond the inner systems, where stars burned cold and civilizations collided, one truth remained. Sometimes, the quietest voice carries the greatest power. Calder's work continued quietly, unheralded yet monumental. The fleets moved with foresight, the colonies thrived under flexible guidance, and the galaxy learned a new form of respect, not for dominance, but for insight, resilience, and the human mind's unique ability to perceive and act where others falter. And somewhere in the far reaches, a young human cadet, observing the galaxy's unfolding conflicts, would later repeat Calder's silent lesson, that even without words, even without recognition, one mind can ripple through the cosmos and change the course of history. Silence had become a language of its own. And in that silence, humanity's legacy endured.